Lupin III, The Castle of Cagliostro is the second animated Lupin film released on December 15, 1979, and the final Lupin project for this retrospective to feature the involvement of Hayao Miyazaki. Although it wasn't his last chronologically, as his episodes of Part 2 wouldn't air until the following year, Cagliostro remains Miyazaki's best-known Lupin work and perhaps his most beloved within the franchise. In sharp contrast to the previous year's Mystery of Mamo, this is a fun-loving adventure with a significantly lighter, more spirited tone, and much less of the bizarre visuals and existentialist themes. If you examine these two side by side, you might not even believe that they're from the same series. But it makes perfect sense when you consider the one behind Cagliostro, Hayao Miyazaki, and his personal history with the character. Although having Miyazaki on board wasn't the initial plan, as while TMS wanted a sequel to Mystery of Mamo, supposedly greenlighting one 3 days after Mamo premiered, he wasn't initially tapped to direct it. Instead, Yasuo Otsuka, the animation director on Lupin III Part 1, was put in a director's seat with the writing team of Part 2 drafting a screenplay. But Otsuka felt this script was too much like the show and called Miyazaki for his help on the project. As you already know if you followed this retrospective, Miyazaki co-directed the second half of Part 1 with Isao Takahata, but had stepped away from the Lupin series to work on other projects such as Anne of Green Gables and Future Boy Conan. He agreed to take over as the director and writer, beginning to write the story in May 1979, just 7 months before the movie debuted. Loosely based on 2 Arsène Lupin stories, The Countess of Cagliostro from 1924 and The Girl with the Green Eyes from 1927, the film also took inspiration from the Paul Grimaud film The King and the Mockingbird. Miyazaki's script also shifted away from the tone of previous Lupin adaptations to deliberately remove what he described as the apathy of entries that came before it. Also, I should note for the record that Miyazaki officially shares writing credits here with Cyber 009 writer Haruya Yamazaki, but apparently none of Yamazaki's contributions to the script made it into the movie, just to clarify that point. The process was apparently very stressful for Miyazaki and his team, who often worked long hours, affecting their physical and mental health. Because they were pressed for time, a lot of concepts Miyazaki came up with had to be shelved, though some were reused for other projects, like Miyazaki's episodes for Part 2. Cagliostro was released on December 15, 1979, but unlike Mystery of Mamo, it wasn't a box office hit. Created with the same production cost of 500 million yen, it only grossed 600 million, which, when you account for theater licensing costs, meant TMS ultimately lost money on the project. Yet Cagliostro has struck a chord with a wider audience that Mamo hasn't found, likely because of both the high profile of Miyazaki and its influence on directors, writers, and animators over the years. Countless anime producers have drawn inspiration from it, and many Western animators and directors have also cited it as an influence, including Great Mouse Detective co-director John Musker, disgraced Pixar co-founder John Lasseter, and, supposedly, legendary film director Steven Spielberg. It's undoubtedly the most famous Lupin project outside the fandom, and its reputation certainly precedes it, even if, just like Mamo, it also has its fair share of naysayers. Considering its softer mood and influence on the rest of the series, many hardcore Lupin fans cite this as the point where the franchise fell out of line with its origins, and, depending on your viewpoint, that's either a good or bad thing. That's certainly a discussion we'll have later, but first, let's talk about the story. Cagliostro begins with Lupin and Jigen robbing a casino, but Lupin quickly realizes the bills are counterfeit, specifically Gothic bills, mythical forgeries that have apparently been responsible for financial collapses throughout history. Lupin is determined to find the source of the bills and heads to the small principality of Cagliostro, but soon after entering, rescues a young girl in a bridal dress who's being chased by some goons, though she soon parts ways with him after leaving behind her ring. The girl, Clarice, is the princess of Cagliostro, and is set to be married to the nation's regent, the Count of Cagliostro, a man from another side of Clarice's family and the head behind the counterfeiting operation. However, there's a secret treasure of the Cagliostros, and their rings, including Clarice's, are the key, and with Lupin plotting to interfere in his wedding plans, the Count will stop at nothing to take Lupin down. The plot is certainly more down-to-earth, none of the fantastical elements of previous adventures, and sticking to a more straightforward narrative. Part 2 and Mystery of Mamo both emphasized weirder stories, taking place in a reality that is familiar in many ways, but that often deviates from what we understand as possible. Cagliostro, by comparison, pilots the series back towards a more traditional storyline, good versus evil, heroes, villains, and love interests, and more classical character traits and story beats. That's not surprising considering Miyazaki's method of storytelling, as even when his stories take place in a fantasy world, they're based on emotions and characters that anybody can relate to. It's essentially a more timeless narrative compared to the stories of Part 2, which had its finger squarely on the pulse of pop culture in both dialogue and plot. But what Cagliostro loses in complexity and cultural acuity, it makes up for in a major area: charm. This is about as feel-good as you're going to get with Lupin, as there's an air of whimsy and elegance that stands out against the rest of the series. This franchise is typically rough, cool, and stylish, appropriate considering its main character is a criminal, but Cagliostro is a simpler, gentler narrative that's almost like a fairy tale in its story and characters. The way Lupin's relationship with Clarice unfolds as a bride locked away and the dashing knight who comes to rescue her story is a tale as old as time, and even with the Lupin spin, the foundation is incredibly familiar. But I don't mean that in a bad way. These are universal themes and character relations that anyone can easily understand, forgoing the intricate philosophy of Mamo and comedic hijinks of Part 2 in favor of telling a classical, time-honored story. There's still plenty of action, suspense, and drama here, and while it's no doubt thrilling and exciting, it's certainly not the most high-octane Lupin adventure. But Clarice's growing adoration of Lupin, Lupin's committal to freeing the girl from her imprisonment, and the Count's growing descent into sheer villainy are all engaging developments, especially when you have wonderfully animated sequences like the last fight in the clock tower or the wedding scene, which to this day might still be my favorite scene in the entire series. While Cagliostro is considered by many to be a turning point in the Lupin franchise, it also represents the beginning of a lot of tropes we associate with Miyazaki's films: a sense of wonder and amazement, villains with complex motivations, and an admiration for the beauty of the world. But it's also a perfect capstone for Miyazaki's involvement with Lupin, as in many ways it reflects his own personal feelings with the character as he had seen it evolve. Miyazaki was one of the leading voices in establishing Lupin's career with his work on Part 1, but after that show, he kept his distance from the Lupin series. By the time Cagliostro began production, he was able to take a more retrospective look back on the character, who was responsible for helping him get his start in the industry. Miyazaki purposefully wanted to create a gentler, older Lupin who has more time and experience to reflect on his past. This ultimately leads to a sticking point for many within the Lupin fandom regarding this movie, as it is, in some ways, a little controversial. Just about everyone can agree that this is a quality film, but whether or not it's a good Lupin movie is more hotly debated, and nowhere is that more evident than in the characterization of Lupin himself. Now, Lupin's undergone many personality changes over the years, ranging from complete psychopath to bumbling thief with a good heart, but Cagliostro is one of the extremely rare instances where he takes on the White Knight role, a person whose primary motivation is helping others, a hero determined to rescue the girl and defeat the villain. Thievery plays very little part in his personality, and outside the first 2 minutes, Lupin barely acts like the criminal he is. He retains his mischievous, intelligent nature, but he's certainly not his typical anti-hero self. A lot of people call this a deliberate dumbing down of Lupin's character, straying too far from the dark, lecherous persona of the manga. Even if Part 1 and Part 2 previously softened these aspects, Cagliostro downright sanitizes them, to the point where you may not even recognize this as a true Lupin III. In essence, Cagliostro's Lupin instead set the standard for Miyazaki's future male protagonists, heroic, dashing young men who may be quirky and/or naughty on occasion, but who have a big heart and whom the female lead ends up falling for. I'll be the first to say that this characterization of Lupin isn't my favorite, but Miyazaki's always had a keen sense for developing strong, memorable male leads, and this is no exception even if it isn't strictly Lupin. Fittingly, Yasuo Yamada's performance is also more reserved, similar to Part 1 where he lets the animation and audio inform the mood of the scene alongside his voice. Clarice is one of the earliest examples of the Lupin girl, the unique female character or characters in a Lupin story that, much like a Bond girl, is a central piece of the narrative. They vary in terms of likability, attitude, and nature, and Clarice essentially becomes the template for future young woman fascinated by Lupin characters. She's also sometimes cited as an early example of moe character design, a topic that, I'll be honest, I really don't know anything about, so I won't comment on here. Just wanted to mention that before any of you brought it up. Anyway, I honestly don't have much to say about Clarice herself because I find her more boring than anything else. There's nothing that really stands out about her to me, though I'll compliment Sumi Shimamoto, who would go on to voice Nausicaa, as her voice is very fitting. The titular Count of Cagliostro, however, is a very memorable villain, a more traditional one with an added layer of creepiness thrown in. Based on both historical figure Count Alessandro de Cagliostro and Arsène Lupin antagonist Josephine Balsamo, alias Countess Cagliostro, this count imposes a calm but firm shadow initially, but gradually becomes more unhinged as the story goes on. He's also a very disturbing villain in many ways, adding an incestuous note to his character with his fascination with Clarice, more so in a blue blood royal inbreeding sense, but it's also implied to be a personal interest as well. Taruo Ishida, also well known as Gene Hackman's dub actor, reflects this in his voice, being very intimidating and nerve-wracking with the Count's vocal mannerisms. The other characters take more of a supporting role this time, leaving room for Lupin, Clarice, and the Count to tell the majority of the story. Jigen is a major player as Lupin's sidekick in the first act, but afterwards barely has any presence until the finale. Fujiko also has a much smaller arc by comparison, and Goemon has maybe like 10 lines in this whole damn movie. Zenigata has a more major presence here compared to Mamo though, and this time he's got a virtual army of policemen fighting alongside him. I actually really love this, as Zenigata feels more like a commander here, someone who's earned a lot of respect from subordinates who remain loyal to him, something you don't always get with Zenigata, as he often acts alone or with a single partner. Still, while the characters might not all be up to snuff, the animation certainly is. Even without the extreme character designs of Mamo, Cagliostro manages to communicate a lot of its emotions in the subtle character movements, relying less on dialogue and voice acting to tell its story and leaving room for the animators to pull their weight. For example, one detail Yasuo Otsuka wanted to get right was the way the characters sit, as he wanted to avoid rigid body poses, and that level of care really helps create a sense of character through seemingly minor details. There's a fluidity in the motion here that's almost unparalleled within the Lupin franchise, and that's not exactly surprising given that this is Miyazaki and Otsuka given a feature film budget. Some of my favorite moments in the entire series come from this movie, and most of the time it's because of the animation and especially the ways these characters move between poses and expressions. Obviously, this video can't do the movie justice since it's nothing but stills, so I encourage you to watch Cagliostro, or at least check out some clips of it just to see this wonderful animation. Once again, I also have to highlight the background art, which is rich in color and detail, but still letting the foreground elements operate effectively. You get the sense that the level of detail in the watercolor artwork Miyazaki created while storyboarding the movie was meticulously captured over for the final product, and that's a testament to the animation team's hard work. Yuji Ono once again provides the music here, and while there's some familiar tunes from the Part 2 soundtrack, it's overall much more of an original soundtrack here, with only a few repeated themes and compositions carrying over. The music is very soothing most of the time, sometimes getting more dramatic or silly depending on the mood of the scene, but often softer and more relaxing. That's especially noticeable in the title song Fire Treasure, a song that's much quieter and serene than Ono's Lupin theme, but is just as phenomenal a track, and that works much better for Cagliostro's tone and story. And that's kind of the key point here. Cagliostro definitely scrubs out a sizable chunk of what made Lupin what it was by that point, but for the story Miyazaki wanted to tell and the characters he wanted to create, the movie is still a delight to watch. It is such a fantastic, pleasant little adventure with gorgeous animation that never fails to make you smile, and it's incredible how well Miyazaki hit it right out of the gate as a film director. But the thing is, I find it more successful as a movie than I do as a piece of the Lupin the Third franchise. If you view this in a bubble, I think you'll be completely satisfied, but looking at it in relation to other Lupin stories, especially the one immediately preceding it, it certainly falls a little flat. Even Monkey Punch himself echoed these sentiments, as while he thought highly of Cagliostro as a movie, it isn't his ideal version of Lupin, and it certainly isn't the character he created. But that meant Cagliostro was also the perfect potential candidate to introduce Western audiences to the franchise, especially as Toho's Mamo dub had an incredibly limited release. TMS actually worked directly with Fred Patton to have Cagliostro shown as a screen test at the 1980 World Science Fiction Convention in Boston on a 35mm print complete with subtitles, a rarity for the time. It received a number of different screenings at conventions and film festivals, and audiences were impressed with the film, but ultimately a wider release would have to wait. The first attempt to dub Cagliostro was the arcade game Cliffhanger by Stern Electronics, which I briefly mentioned in the Part 2 video, and I'll say this. If you ever wanted to watch a condensed and completely neutered version of Cagliostro with terrible voice acting, this is perfect for you.
Oh no!
Millions! Trillions!
It's counterfeit!
It wouldn't be until the early 90s that Cagliostro would receive wider screenings in the United States thanks to Streamline Pictures, the company that would later dub Miyazaki's Part 2 episodes and Mystery of Mamo. This was the studio's first Lupin dub released to home media in 1992, so it isn't nearly as refined as Tales of the Wolf or its Mamo dub, especially regarding the dialogue. In a word, it's clumsy, picking up on less of the nuance, putting too much romance into the Lupin-Clarice relationship, inserting dialogue where there wasn't any too often, and especially the changes to iconic or important lines courtesy of Carl Macek. But the cast all does a great job once again, even if their voices aren't as nice of a fit for this lighter story. I've already praised the core cast and my opinion of them hasn't changed, though I should call out Power Rangers actor Steve Kramer as Goemon, who is stiffer than Ardwhite Chamberlain's performance from Mamo, but considering Goemon's minimal role here, I guess that's not a huge deal. Space Adventure Cobra the movie actress J.C. Henning does pretty alright as Clarice, but I didn't find Michael McConaughey, who later voiced Gordon in Streamline's Mamo dub, and Kano in the Mortal Kombat games, that intimidating as the Count. He's a bit too snobbish for my tastes. But in my opinion, the better English dub came in 2000, then re-released in 2006, from Manga, the American branch of the British company which dubbed Mystery of Mamo 4 years prior. With a new translation by Neil Nadelman and script by Mary Claypool, this version is much more faithful to the original Japanese script, even with a number of added swears that, I'll admit, feel very out of place here. The audio also includes a different sound effect track with added noises that actually makes a lot of these scenes pop really well. I'm typically against adding newer sound effects in dubs like this, but somehow it works here. As for the cast, they all do a solid job with a few exceptions. Gundam voice actor John Snyder doesn't really hit the right notes as Jigen, and while the late Kevin Seymour, founder of Animes and also the voice director for this dub, is a decent Zenigata, I found him a bit too gruff. Everyone else is excellent though, including General Hospital actor Michael Gregory as Goemon, Trigun and Danganronpa performer Dorothy Elias Fawn as Fujiko, and especially Solid Snake himself David Hayter, who plays Lupin. I also want to highlight Bridget Hoffman as Clarice, also famous for playing Lane from Serial Experiments Lane, and Iris Vale from the Fate series, who brings a very natural performance to the role. And Kirk Thornton, whom you may recognize as Hajime Saito from Rurouni Kenshin, portrays the Count as a dignified but undeniable evil character, a great performance all around. This is the dub to watch if you want to see Cagliostro in English for sure, but even then, it's only a decent substitution for the Japanese version, and I once again implore you to watch the original audio with subtitles if you check this film out. Which I highly recommend you do, because as I've said, The Castle of Cagliostro is a beautiful movie that I think manages to overcome its reduction of what many consider the real spirit of the series. I've watched this movie about 7 times within the past year or so, and there was always some detail I noticed or some sequence I paid attention to that captivates me whenever I put it on. I totally understand why a number of Lupin fans would consider it overrated, and looking at it within the context of the series, it isn't Lupin's greatest adventure. I actually think Mystery of Mamo works better in this regard. To be clear, I love both of these movies, but for different reasons, and in my mind, Cagliostro doesn't have the barrier to entry that Mamo does. You don't need any knowledge of Lupin to enjoy this film. In fact, for some people, you might like it better if you don't have that knowledge. The Miyazaki seal of quality is hard to ignore, and even if this isn't your favorite Lupin story, it's hard to deny that this is a fun, endearing film, though, just like Miyazaki himself, I'm looking forward to moving on. After Cagliostro and his Part 2 episodes, Miyazaki felt burnt out on Lupin III, as he felt that he had nothing more to contribute to the franchise, and, as Yasuo Otsuka put it, he's a person who's always looking ahead. He was also growing weary of TV anime by this time anyway, and after working on the initial few episodes of Sherlock Hound, he left television for good in favor of moving full-time into the film industry. While he was working on Cagliostro, Miyazaki met Toshi Suzuki, editor for the then new magazine Animage, who, 2 years later, encouraged Miyazaki to draw a manga that would serve as a tie-in to a film concept he was working with. That manga, of course, was Nausicaa of the Valley of the Wind, and the rest is history. Miyazaki was vital in establishing Lupin as an anime character, and while his version of Lupin isn't everyone's cup of tea, his impact on the series cannot be understated. And as we move onward to future Lupin stories, it's critical to recognize his importance in bringing this character to life. And as for Lupin, our next stop on his journey took him back to the land of television with another animated series, Lupin III Part 3, but before that, TMS would partner with Deke Entertainment in an attempt to bring Lupin to the Western world. Taking place years in the future in a sci-fi setting, it would have featured Lupin's distant descendant, a private detective named Lupin VIII, and before it could get off the ground, it was shelved. So before we look at the next proper continuation, we'll take a deep dive into this cancelled project. For now, thanks for watching this video. If you liked it, give it a like, leave a comment, and make sure to subscribe and click that bell to see when new videos go live. Have you joined the Cloud Connection Discord yet? If not, you should come hang out and chat with us. The link is in the description. Until next time, this is Cloud Connection signing off.